So I saw a sci-fi dystopian movie with a different take on the subject matter. Pretty unique one. It's also a really fun dark comedy that might be a little too weird for some people. So The Lobster is set in the near future, a dystopian society where everyone has to have a couple. Everyone has to have a husband or a wife. Even when you are married and then lose your loved one later on, you have to go back to this hotel, and this is what Colin Farrell's character has to do. Colin Farrell is a man named David, and he had recently lost his wife, or his wife left him, or something along those lines, and now he has to go with all these other single people to this hotel to find his significant other. If he does not find someone he's compatible with within 45 days, then he gets turned into an animal. That's right, if you don't find your significant other in this hotel, you get turned into an animal. But it's not too cruel, because at least you get a choice on what animal you want to be. And I'm sure you can judge from the title what Colin Farrell says he's going to be if he fails. And here's the reason why.
Now, have you thought of what animal you'd like to be if you end up alone?
Yes, a lobster.
Why a lobster?
Because lobsters live for over 100 years. Are blue-blooded, like aristocrats. And stay fertile all their lives. I also like the sea. Very much. I water ski and swim quite well since I was a teenager.
I must congratulate you. The first thing most people think of is a dog, which is why the world is full of dogs. Very few people choose an unusual animal, which is why they are endangered. A lobster is an excellent choice.
But anyway, Colin Farrell needs to find his ideal match within 45 days, otherwise he gets turned into a lobster. Now look, I smiled practically throughout the entire film. There was a few moments where I didn't, but that's because it actually does get serious at times. But other than that, it is a really funny, dark comedy. Now, I do like dystopian society movies, and this is a very different take on dystopian societies that I've seen. Its vision is unique and quite fantastical. It also leads to a bit of fantasy realism. Because we never really see the machine that turns people to animals, we never see anyone get turned, and we never really get explained on how they have such technology. We also never really get an explanation on how the society ended up being the way it is. Or even what forced society in making rules that people have to be couples. And so it leads to fantasy realism where we have to take a leap of faith, as it will. We have to accept this crazy fantastical notion, and once we accept that and once we can get past that, then the whole movie just becomes clear and we can just get on with the movie. Plus, we're dealing with a society that has long gotten used to these rules, and so for them it's just normal day's life. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of fantasy realism within it. It's also very clear that these society rules have really altered the minds and how people feel about love and being with a couple and what they look for a significant other in this fictional society. And I think it's very easy to interpret mainly from how they speak to each other and what they look for in a significant other. Because ultimately there's a bit of desperation within it, there's a bit of, hey, this is the law, we just have to deal with it. And so a lot of people talk in a more logical fashion rather than a more emotional and a more love-driven fashion to each other. Which leads to some very funny moments within the dialogue because they're very logical, they talk very formal to each other, they're almost like emotionless robots at times. And sometimes they'll talk about some really serious and dark stuff very nonchalantly and very dryly. Now the comedy style of this movie is very dry and it's dark comedy. But basically it's a dark comedy delivered dryly. And if you don't like that comedic style, then you might have a problem finding this funny. And because the dialogue is delivered in such a dry manner and the characters speak very logically, there are times where you might feel that these don't feel like real people and the dialogue is crappy and the acting is bad. Some people can view it that way, but I think that really just shows what kind of society this futuristic science fiction dark comedy is like. And for me, I found it very funny, very quirky. I really enjoyed that type of humor, which could be a little too much for some people. I feel that that kind of comedy could get old really fast for some viewers. Also, dark comedy is a very tricky thing. Sometimes it can be really graphic and disturbing, and too disturbing for some people. I will tell you this much, there is one moment where I was trying to figure out, okay, were we supposed to be laughing at this? Is this supposed to be a dark comedic moment? Or are we supposed to take this seriously? It involves an animal dying in a really crazy way, and a very graphic way. And because of how it affects our main character, I feel that we were supposed to take it seriously and shocked, because I definitely was shocked by it. There's a lot of big stars and a lot of familiar faces within this movie, and I thought the acting was handled completely well. Especially since they're playing as characters that are a little bit more emotionless, a little bit more logical, and a little bit more shifty. I found the world that this movie was creating very interesting. The inner workings of how the society works and how this hotel is run and how you can get more days by hunting loners in the woods.
He looked out the window. The unconscious bodies of the captured loners were lying on the wet ground. Thank God they wear those waterproof ponchos, he thought.
There's a lot of great satire within it, and it all works for the building of the world that this movie is set in. Definitely made me feel I wanted a little bit more out of the world and know more about it. Also, there's a lot of world building within the movie, and enough hints to be able to formulate your own interpretation of the world. These are definitely very detached human beings within this movie. Not once did I actually feel that people actually formed love between them. It was just mainly a way to not be a loner so you don't get hunted or turned into an animal. I mean, hell, the way that people try to choose each other as couples is by trying to find a characteristic or one little thing about the other person that they have about themselves. Like, there's one character in the movie whose wife died, and the only reason he had that wife to begin with was because they both had a limp.
My mother entered the hotel but didn't make it and was turned into a wolf. I really missed her. I found out she'd been moved to a zoo. I often went there to see her. I'd give her raw meat. I knew that wolves liked raw meat, but I couldn't figure out which of the wolves was my mother, so I used to give a little bit to each of them. One day I decided to enter the enclosure. I really missed her and I wanted a hug. I climbed the fence and jumped in. All the wolves charged at once and attacked me. All but two who stood motionless. My guess is that one of those two must have been my mother. Thankfully, I didn't lose my leg, I just have this limp, which is also my defining characteristic. My wife died 6 days ago. She was very beautiful and I loved her very much. She had a limp too.
And so he goes to the hotel hoping there's another person with a limp, because that's his character-defining trait. And when he can't find one, he sees this woman who has nosebleeds very often. So in order to get with her, he lies that he has nosebleeds often too. And in order to try to imitate nosebleeds, he would slam his head against something, or he'd cut his nose a little bit so that he would have nosebleeds. Desperation. And similar to how the people act within the movie, this movie is very quick and to the point. Might be close to 2 hours long, but it definitely doesn't feel like that to me. It only gives you just enough information for you to realize what's going on. And so if you're not familiar with that kind of style, if you rather have things deeply explained to you, then you might find this movie a little underwhelming. For me, there's never really a dull moment within the film, whether it be something really funny, something that actually is quite emotional, or simply them being in the woods and seeing a strange animal you wouldn't normally see in the woods pass in the background, because when you get turned into an animal, whatever animal you choose, you get sent into the woods, where eventually Colin Farrell is in the woods because of this other society that, yeah, the movie actually does have rebels, the loners, that have their own little society as well. It's very twisted, very satirical, very funny, and even all the characters, there's only one character that actually has a name, and that is Colin Farrell's character named David. Everyone else is actually named after the traits or the jobs they have in the film. Hell, even the narrator in the film, who's played by Rachel Weisz, she doesn't even have a name in the film. Now, the ending could piss a few people off. I will warn you, it is a more open ending. But this is an open ending that I had no issue with. This isn't like 400 Days open ending. No, this is not an ending where there's so many possibilities that nothing makes sense or anything like that. This is one where you have 2 possible choices for the ending, maybe 3 if you're really being creative. And there's enough information in the film to help you lead to some of those decisions without any one decision being the true ending or all of them just being complete crap and make no sense, like 400 Days. So I just feel I should warn you a little bit about that. My only issues is sometimes it gets a little too weird, sometimes things aren't explained all too well, but overall this is a very unique film, a very fun film. I had a blast watching it, and I'm going to give The Lobster 4.5 stars. It's probably closer to 4 3/4, but I only do halves and wholes, so 4.5. So did you see The Lobster? What did you think about it? Go ahead and comment below. And if you like this video and you want to see more, please subscribe and check out my movie reviews of 2015 and 2016. As always, this is Bruce Gifford, and this was Just My Opinion.